I came to the reunion and met my sister there. When I got to the hotel, Alex parked his car, a modest domestic sedan, in the high school parking lot and immediately felt the weight of the moment. The reunion venue shimmered under rows of elegant fairy lights strung across the school's front lawn, casting a warm glow on an assembly of luxury vehicles that exuded wealth and success. Everywhere he turned, gleaming sports cars, sleek SUVs, and vintage classics stood like trophies of prosperity. Mercedes, Porsches, and a conspicuous Lamborghini dominated the lot, their pristine bodies reflecting the admiration of arriving alumni. Alex felt an unsettling twist in his stomach as he noticed a Rolls-Royce, Jason's Rolls-Royce, occupying the most prominent space near the entrance. He sighed, brushing off the discomfort as he grabbed his jacket from the back seat and made his way toward the laughter and chatter spilling out of the venue. Inside, the gymnasium had been transformed into a ballroom, with a DJ spinning nostalgic tracks from their teenage years. Everyone seemed at ease, enveloped by the ambience of shared memories and mutual accomplishments. Yet for Alex, the atmosphere was far from comforting. He couldn't shake the feeling of being underdressed, not just in clothing but in the game of life. A group of former classmates near the punch bowl waved at him. Alex forced a smile and joined them, exchanging polite greetings. The conversation drifted between their professional achievements, families, and lavish vacations. One by one, the others mentioned their cars, subtly turning the discussion into a competition of luxury and taste. Alex avoided eye contact, hoping to steer the conversation elsewhere, but it wasn't long before someone noticed his hesitation. "Hey, Alex," came a voice, sly and confident. It was Jason. Jason had aged into a tall, broad-shouldered man with a carefully tailored suit that radiated success. A diamond-studded watch sparkled on his wrist as he extended a hand, which Alex shook reluctantly. "Still driving domestic, huh? Let me guess, Chevy? Or did you upgrade to a Ford?" Jason grinned, his tone dripping with mockery. A ripple of laughter spread through the small group. Alex's cheeks burned, but he kept his composure. "It's a reliable car," he replied evenly. "Gets me where I need to go." Jason snorted. "Reliable? Yeah, I guess that's one way to put it. But man, you've got to treat yourself better. Life's too short to settle." He gestured broadly toward the door, where his Rolls-Royce gleamed under the streetlights like a crown jewel. "That's mine out front. Took me a while to decide between that and the Bentley, but you know me, always had a taste for the finer things." The others laughed again, their eyes flickering between Alex and Jason as though silently weighing their social standings. Alex clenched his fists discreetly, willing himself not to react. He didn't want to give Jason the satisfaction. And then, as if on cue, Rachel appeared. She moved gracefully through the crowd, her figure encased in a shimmering evening gown that highlighted her every feature. Rachel, Alex's high school crush. The girl who had been the center of his adolescent dreams. Seeing her again was a punch to the gut, but the real blow came when she looped her arm through Jason's and leaned against him affectionately. "Jason," she cooed, her smile as dazzling as ever. "Who's this?" Jason smirked. "This," he said with mock grandeur, "is Alec. Remember him? He used to sit behind you in calculus, doodling in his notebook instead of paying attention." Rachel squinted, pretending to search her memory. "Oh, Alex," she exclaimed with exaggerated surprise. "Yes, I remember now." Her tone was polite but distant, as if she were straining to place his face. Alex managed a tight smile. "Good to see you, Rachel." "You too," she said lightly, though her eyes darted to Jason as if to gauge whether she'd said the right thing. Then, her gaze shifted toward Jason's car parked outside. "You were just telling me about your Rolls, babe. I think it's my favorite car yet. So elegant. You really know how to pick them." Jason's grin widened as he tightened his hold on her waist. "Of course. Only the best for us." The words hit Alex like a jab, but before he could respond, Jason turned to him again. "What are you driving these days, Alex? Don't tell me you're still rocking that old Honda from high school." The group erupted in laughter, and Alex felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on him. His chest tightened as he struggled to find the right words. "Actually," he began, his voice calm but strained, "I drive a—" "Wait, don't tell me," Jason interrupted, raising a hand as if to silence him. "Let me guess. Something sensible. Fuel-efficient, maybe?" Alex always was the practical type. He winked at Rachel, who giggled softly. The humiliation was almost unbearable, but Alex refused to let them see how much it affected him. He stood his ground, forcing himself to meet Jason's gaze without flinching. "At least I don't have to overcompensate," Alex said finally, his words measured and deliberate. The laughter around them faltered, and for a moment, there was silence. Jason's grin faltered briefly, but he quickly recovered, brushing off the remark with a chuckle. Touché, he said, though his tone carried an edge. But hey, no hard feelings. Not everyone's cut out for the fast lane, right? Rachel's laugh rang out again, and Alex felt a pang of something he couldn't quite define. Regret, maybe, or the bitter sting of unmet expectations. As the conversation shifted to other topics, he found himself retreating to the edges of the room, sipping his drink and watching from afar. The Rolls-Royce gleamed like a monument to everything he hadn't achieved, and Rachel's laughter lingered in his ears long after the night was over. As the evening wore on, the crowd at the high school reunion thickened. The room buzzed with conversations about promotions, startups, and vacations in far-off places. Jason seemed to thrive in the spotlight, holding court among their classmates like a self-appointed king. Rachel, perched at his side, radiated confidence and sophistication, occasionally offering a light laugh or a clever quip to match Jason's bravado. Alex stayed on the outskirts of the conversations, sipping his drink and observing. He didn't care much for the small talk or the competitive undertones that seemed to lace every interaction. Most of his former classmates seemed obsessed with proving just how far they had come, how much better they were than the kids they had been years ago. Alex found it exhausting. Unfortunately, his efforts to remain unnoticed didn't last long. Jason's booming voice cut through the chatter, calling out to him across the room. "Hey, Alex!" Jason gestured for him to come over, his grin wide and mischievous. "Don't be a stranger, man. Come join us." Reluctantly, Alex made his way toward the group, every step feeling heavier than the last. When he reached them, Jason threw an arm around his shoulders in a show of exaggerated camaraderie. "Everyone, this guy right here," Jason began, his voice dripping with mock affection, "is one of the most hard-working, dedicated guys I know." He paused, his grin widening as he glanced at Rachel. "In fact, I've got a little proposition for you, Alex." Alex's stomach tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. "What's that, Jason?" Jason leaned in slightly, his voice loud enough to ensure everyone nearby could hear. "How would you like to come work for me? I could use someone like you, honest, dependable, great under pressure. I'm serious, man. You'd make an excellent addition to my team." Alex raised an eyebrow. "What kind of position are we talking about?" Jason smirked, clearly enjoying the attention of their audience. "Driver." A ripple of laughter moved through the group as Jason continued. "I mean, think about it. You'd get to drive the Rolls every day. It's a step up from, what is it you're driving now? A Ford? A Chevy?" The laughter grew louder, and Rachel's tinkling laugh rang out above the rest. She placed a perfectly manicured hand on Jason's arm, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "Oh, Jason, you're terrible," she said, though she made no effort to stop him. "I'm just saying," Jason replied, shrugging innocently. "It's an opportunity, right? I'd pay you well, of course. You'd get a uniform and everything. What do you say, Alex? Interested?" Alex felt the weight of their stares, the mocking smiles, the barely contained laughter. He knew they were all waiting for him to react, to lash out or stumble over his words. But he refused to give them the satisfaction. "Thanks for the offer, Jason," Alex said evenly, his voice calm. "But I think I'll pass." Jason feigned disappointment, placing a hand over his heart. "Out. Turning me down just like that? I thought we were friends." "You thought wrong," Alex said, his tone steady. "And for the record, I'm not looking for a job." "Oh, come on," Jason said, his grin turning sharp. "Don't be like that. We're all friends here, right? Just trying to help you out." The laughter around them didn't subside, and Alex could feel the eyes of their classmates on him, judging him, dissecting him. One of them, a guy Alex vaguely remembered as being part of the football team, piped up. "Wait, you're not a driver? What do you do then?" His tone was curious but carried a hint of skepticism. "Yeah," another chimed in. "Don't tell me you're one of those government workers. What is it, like? DMV? Mailman?" "Let me guess," Jason cut in, his voice brimming with mockery. "You're one of those civil servants who takes coffee breaks every 10 minutes, right? Living the dream?" The laughter rose again, and Rachel giggled as she leaned into Jason's side, whispering something that made him laugh even harder. Alex met their gazes steadily, refusing to flinch under the barrage of humiliation. "I work in infrastructure," Alex said simply, offering no further explanation. "Infrastructure," Jason repeated, dragging out the word as though it were some sort of punchline. "Well, that's noble." Alex didn't bother correcting him. He knew they weren't interested in the truth. They were only interested in making themselves feel superior. It was a game, and he wasn't playing. "Seriously, though," Jason continued, his tone shifting to something almost pitying. "If you ever change your mind, the offer's always on the table. I mean it. I'd even throw in a few perks. Maybe let you keep the car on weekends." The group dissolved into laughter again, and Alex felt a flicker of something close to anger. But he pushed it down, burying it beneath a layer of calm detachment. He had nothing to prove to these people. "Thanks, Jason," he said finally, his voice steady. "I'll keep that in mind." Jason clapped him on the back, clearly pleased with himself. "That's the spirit. Always good to keep your options open." As the laughter died down and the conversation shifted, Alex excused himself, making his way toward the refreshment table. He needed a moment to collect himself, to breathe. The humiliation still lingered, sharp and bitter, but he refused to let it consume him. He reminded himself that their opinions didn't matter. Their shallow games, their need to flaunt their wealth and status, it was all meaningless. From across the room, he could see Jason and Rachel laughing together, their heads close as they whispered to each other. The sight sent a pang through him, but he forced himself to look away. He wouldn't give them any more power over him. He wouldn't let their mockery define him. Instead, he focused on the sound of the music, the hum of conversations, the faint scent of cologne and perfume that filled the air. He reminded himself that this was just one night, just one moment in a sea of moments that would come and go. And as the night wore on, he found solace in the knowledge that he didn't need their approval, their validation, their shallow praise. He was Alex, and that was enough. The tension in the room crackled as Jason, emboldened by the laughter of his audience, decided to push the game further. He had won the crowd with his jabs at Alex, and the satisfaction of seeing his former classmate as the butt of every joke fueled his next move. Alex had just reached the far end of the refreshment table, pouring himself a glass of water, when Jason approached again, this time flanked by two burly men in sharp suits. They stood just behind him, their postures rigid and intimidating, like shadows ready to strike on command. It was clear they weren't part of the reunion crowd. Their steely expressions and silent presence drew murmurs from nearby classmates. "Leaving so soon, Alex?" Jason's voice carried across the room, cutting through the murmur of conversations. The crowd quieted slightly, heads turning toward the confrontation. Alex turned slowly, meeting Jason's smug grin with a steady gaze. "Just getting some air," he replied evenly. "Air? Come on, man, the night's still young," Jason exclaimed, gesturing broadly to the room. "I thought we were just starting to catch up. You're not running away, are you?" The faint ripple of laughter from their classmates stung more than Alex cared to admit. But he held his ground, his expression calm despite the clear attempt to provoke him. "I'm not running, Jason," he said. "Just don't see the point of sticking around for this." Jason chuckled, shaking his head. "Man, you've got no sense of humor. Always so serious." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so only Alex could hear. "You sure you don't want that driver job? Could save you a lot of trouble." Alex's jaw tightened, but he refused to rise to the bait. "I already told you," he said quietly. "I'm not interested." Jason stepped back, raising his hands in mock surrender. All right, just trying to help a friend out." His voice grew louder, enough for the crowd to hear. "But hey, if you're not up for the job, maybe you could wash the car instead. I've got a big meeting downtown next week, and the rolls could use a good shine." The laughter was louder this time, a wave of ridicule that seemed to swell around Alex. He could feel the weight of their stares, the mocking smiles, the whispers that weren't quite whispers. Jason's grin widened as he soaked in the attention, clearly relishing his role as the center of the evening. "Jason," Alex said, his voice steady but firm, "you're going too far." Jason tilted his head, feigning innocence. "Too far? Come on, Alex. It's all in good fun. Besides, a little banter never hurt anyone. Right, boys?" He glanced back at the two bodyguards, who smirked faintly but remained silent. Alex's gaze flicked to the bodyguards, then back to Jason. He spoke quietly, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. "You're making a mistake." Jason laughed, the sound loud and unrestrained. "A mistake? Me?" He gestured to the room, the wealth, the power that seemed to radiate from every corner. "Look around, Alex. This is my world, my city. You think I'm worried about making mistakes?" The crowd was silent now, watching the scene unfold with a mix of curiosity and unease. Alex felt the tension in the room shift, the air growing heavier as Jason took another step closer. "You don't get it, do you?" Jason continued, his tone turning cold. "This isn't high school anymore. I'm not just some punk on the football team. I've got connections, influence. If I want something, I get it. And if someone gets in my way..." He let the words hang in the air, the implied threat unmistakable. Alex's eyes narrowed, but he kept his voice even. "You don't need to do this, Jason. It's not worth it." Jason smirked, his confidence unwavering. "Not worth it? You think I'm scared of you? Look at you. You're nothing. Just a guy clinging to whatever scraps life threw at him. Meanwhile, I'm out here running this city. People respect me, Alex. They listen to me." Alex took a step closer, his expression unreadable. "Respect isn't something you can buy, Jason. And it doesn't come from tearing other people down." Jason scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "Spare me the lecture. You've got no idea what it takes to survive in the real world. You think you're better than me? Standing there in your cheap suit, acting all high and mighty." Alex's calm demeanor didn't falter. "I don't think I'm better than you, Jason. But I know I don't need to prove anything to anyone here." Jason's smirk faltered for a brief moment, but he quickly recovered, turning to the crowd. "You hear that, everyone? Alex thinks he's above all this. Above us. Maybe he needs a reminder of where he stands?" He nodded to one of the bodyguards, who took a step forward. The crowd tensed, a collective intake of breath rippling through the room. But Alex didn't move. He stood his ground, his gaze locked on Jason. "Don't do this," Alex warned, his voice low but firm. "You're not going to like how it ends." Jason laughed again, the sound hollow. "Oh, I think I'll manage. What's the worst you could do, huh? Call the cops? Write a strongly worded letter? Face it, Alex. You're out of your league." For a moment, the room was silent. The bodyguard hesitated, glancing at Jason as if waiting for a clear command. Alex's calm, steady presence seemed to unnerve him, though he tried not to show it. Finally, Alex spoke, his tone quiet but carrying a weight that silenced the room. "You think you're untouchable, Jason. But the truth is, you're just a scared little kid hiding behind money and muscle. You want to intimidate me? Go ahead. But don't say I didn't warn you when it all falls apart." The words hung in the air like a challenge, daring Jason to make his move. But Jason didn't respond. He stood frozen, his smirk fading as the reality of Alex's unshakable confidence sank in. Without another word, Alex turned and walked toward the exit, leaving Jason and his entourage standing in stunned silence. The crowd parted for him, their whispers growing louder as he disappeared into the night. Jason watched him go, his fists clenched at his sides. The laughter and applause he had enjoyed earlier felt distant now, replaced by a gnawing sense of unease. For the first time that evening, he wasn't sure he had won. Alex paused at the doorway, his hand resting lightly on the polished handle as the quiet whispers and murmurs of their former classmates filled the gym. The weight of Jason's taunts and attempted intimidation hung in the air like a sour taste. Alex exhaled deeply, his back still turned to the crowd. He hadn't come to the reunion to be drawn into this petty theater of egos and insecurities. But Jason's arrogance, the shallow laughter of their classmates, and the quiet smirks of the bodyguards had pushed the line. He turned around, walking back toward the crowd with deliberate, measured step. The room fell silent as Alex stopped in front of Jason, whose smirk had returned. The tension was palpable, a crackling energy that had everyone holding their breath. Jason raised an eyebrow, leaning slightly toward Alex as if challenging him. "Something to say, Alex? I thought you were done here." Alex met Jason's gaze steadily, his voice calm but carrying an edge that sliced through the room. "You've been running your mouth all night, Jason. You think money gives you power. You think these two guys behind you make you untouchable. But you're wrong." The smirk on Jason's face faltered slightly, though he quickly masked it with a short laugh. "Oh really? And what makes you think you're in a position to lecture me about power?" Alex ignored the question, his focus unwavering. "Do you know what I do, Jason? Do you have any idea?" Jason snorted, waving a dismissive hand. "You said it yourself, something in infrastructure, right? Sounds like a fancy way to say you sit in an office shuffling papers." A few chuckles from the crowd punctuated the insult, but Alex didn't react. Instead, he folded his hands calmly in front of him, letting the silence build before speaking. "I work for the Department of Urban Development and Compliance," Alex began, his voice clear and precise. "Specifically, I oversee the enforcement of federal regulations related to real estate development, construction permits, and municipal zoning. In other words, Jason, I have the authority to review every project you've ever built, or plan to build, and determine whether it meets the legal and ethical standards required by law." Jason's smirk vanished entirely, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. He opened his mouth to respond, but Alex didn't give him the chance. "You see," Alex continued, his tone measured and professional, "the kind of wealth you're flaunting here tonight? It's built on permits, contracts, and connections. And all of those things require oversight. My oversight. If I find irregularities in your business practices, if I so much as suspect a discrepancy, your little empire could crumble overnight." Jason's face paled as the weight of Alex's words began to sink in. The bodyguards, who had been standing stiffly behind him, exchanged uneasy glances. It was clear they were starting to question whether Jason's bluster was worth the risk of tangling with someone who might actually have the power to back up his words. "I've seen men like you before," Alex said, his voice dropping slightly, making the room feel even smaller. "Men who think they're invincible because they've bought their way into the right circles. They think their money can protect them from consequences, that they can intimidate or bribe their way out of trouble. But when the law catches up to them, and it always does, they fall faster than they ever thought possible." Jason's bravado cracked, his eyes darting nervously toward the bodyguards as if seeking reassurance. But they remained silent, their rigid stances now tinged with hesitation. The tension in the room was suffocating, the once laughing classmates now watching in stunned silence. "You're bluffing," Jason muttered, though his voice lacked the confidence it had carried earlier. "You don't have that kind of power." Alex smiled faintly, his calm demeanor unshaken. "Bluffing?" He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a sleek leather case. With a flick of his wrist, he opened it to reveal his government credentials, the official emblem glinting under the fluorescent light. The room collectively held its breath as Jason stared at the badge, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He looked to the bodyguards again, but their unease was now unmistakable. One of them shifted uncomfortably, taking a small step back as if re-evaluating the situation. Alex snapped the badge case shut and returned it to his pocket. "You can keep playing this game, Jason," he said evenly, "but it won't end the way you think. And if you want to escalate things, if you think your bodyguards or your money will save you, then go ahead. But I'll remind you, every permit, every project, every deal you've ever made can be reviewed. And if I find even the smallest irregularity, I will make it my personal mission to see that the law is enforced." Jason's confidence crumbled further, his expression shifting from defiance to desperation. He glanced around the room, searching for support among the classmates who had laughed at Alex earlier. But no one spoke. The crowd had turned from spectators to silent witnesses, their expressions a mix of shock and discomfort. You can't," Jason stammered, his voice faltering. "I've got lawyers. Connections? Connections won't save you from the law," Alex replied calmly. "And lawyers? They're only as good as the case you give them. If you've got nothing to hide, Jason, you've got nothing to worry about. But somehow, I don't think that's the case." The bodyguards, now visibly uneasy, stepped back further, clearly unwilling to engage in a confrontation that could escalate into something far more damaging than they'd signed up for. Jason's face flushed with humiliation, the reality of the situation settling over him like a cold weight. Alex took a step closer, his voice lowering so only Jason could hear. "This isn't a fight you want, Jason. Walk away while you still can." Jason swallowed hard, his hands clenching at his sides as he struggled to maintain his composure. But it was clear to everyone in the room that he had lost. The man who had spent the entire evening posturing and boasting now stood exposed, his power and influence meaningless in the face of real authority. Without another word, Alex turned and walked toward the exit, his steps measured and unhurried. The room was silent as he left, the weight of the confrontation lingering in the air like a storm that had passed but left destruction in its wake. Jason stood frozen, his confidence shattered, his humiliation complete. The crowd began to disperse, their murmurs filling the space as they avoided looking directly at him. The bodyguards, sensing the futility of their presence, quietly slipped away, leaving Jason to face the aftermath alone. And Alex? He stepped into the cool night air, the tension of the evening melting away as he left the reunion behind. He hadn't wanted to reveal his position or his power, but Jason had forced his hand. As Alex walked to his car, he felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only the quiet resolve of a man who had stood his ground and refused to be belittled. Jason might have wealth, but Alex had something far greater: integrity, authority, and the knowledge that true power didn't come from money or intimidation, it came from standing tall, even when others tried to knock you down. The night of the reunion was only the beginning. As Alex drove home, the weight of Jason's arrogance lingered in his mind like a storm cloud refusing to dissipate. It wasn't just the personal insults or the public humiliation Jason had tried to inflict. It was the brazen belief that his wealth and connections put him above accountability. Alex had seen men like Jason before, men who built their fortunes on shaky foundations and acted as though the rules didn't apply to them. But Jason had pushed too far. His bluster, his threats, and his flaunting of wealth had set something in motion, a quiet determination in Alex to make sure Jason was held accountable. The next day, Alex sat in his office at the Department of Urban Development and Compliance, reviewing reports and files from the backlog of cases awaiting attention. But in the back of his mind, Jason's smirk still gnawed at him. Alex leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes for a moment, and then made a decision. He opened a new file and typed the name Jason Matthews into the search database connected to various government systems. He started with real estate permits, zoning applications, and tax record. As the results loaded, Alex's instincts told him what he would find: irregularities, inconsistencies, and corners cut in ways that Jason likely thought no one would ever notice. The first red flag came from a series of construction permits filed under Jason's family business, Matthews Enterprises. Multiple projects had been marked as expedited approvals, a process that normally required extensive documentation and oversight. Yet here they were, approved with almost no supporting paperwork. Alex's eyes narrowed. He cross-referenced the permits with the department's inspection report. Several of Jason's luxury developments were listed as being in compliance, but when Alex pulled up the corresponding inspection logs, they were suspiciously empty. There were no site visits, no environmental impact assessments, nothing but a rubber-stamped approval. It was the first thread, and Alex began to pull. Over the following days, he uncovered more and more discrepancies. Financial records didn't add up. Tax filings were riddled with gaps and suspicious deductions. Shell companies tied to Matthews Enterprises funneled money into offshore accounts. The deeper Alex dug, the clearer it became that Jason's empire wasn't just built on arrogance, it was built on fraud, corruption, and deceit. Alex didn't stop there. He flagged the information for his department's internal audit team, alerting them to the scope of the irregularities. Soon, the IRS, the Department of Justice, and the city's anti-corruption task force were looped in. What had started as a quiet investigation quickly snowballed into a full-scale inquiry. Within weeks, the fallout began. The first headlines were subtle: Matthews Enterprises under federal scrutiny, but as more details emerged, the story exploded. News outlets reported on massive fraud, tax evasion schemes, and bribery allegations. Journalists unearthed connections between Jason's family business and a network of corrupt city officials who had been approving permits and contracts in exchange for under-the-table payout. Jason, who had spent years basking in the glow of his wealth and influence, suddenly found himself at the center of a scandal that was too big to contain. His confident smirk was nowhere to be seen as reporters camped outside his office, hurling questions he couldn't answer. "Mr. Matthews, is it true your company evaded millions in taxes? Are you aware of the federal investigation into your business practices? Do you have a response to the allegations of bribery and corruption?" Jason tried to maintain his composure, but his carefully curated image of power and success crumbled under the weight of the evidence. The real blow came when federal agents raided the offices of Matthews Enterprises. Footage of the raid aired on every major news network, showing Jason being escorted out of the building, his face pale and his jaw clenched. The bodyguards who had once stood behind him like statues were nowhere to be found. The collapse of Jason's empire sent shockwaves through his personal life as well. His father, Richard Matthews, a shrewd businessman and the founder of Matthews Enterprises, was furious. The elder Matthews had spent decades building the family business, and Jason's reckless behavior had destroyed it in a matter of weeks. "You've ruined everything," Richard spat during their final confrontation, his voice trembling with rage. "Do you have any idea what you've done to this family? To my name?" Jason, who had always relied on his father's wealth and connections to shield him, tried to argue. "Dad, I didn't know." "Don't lie to me," Richard roared, slamming his fist on the desk. "You think I don't see what you are? You've been riding my coattails your whole life, and now you've dragged us both into the mud. You're no son of mine." With those words, Jason was disowned. His father cut all ties, freezing Jason's access to family funds and publicly distancing himself from the scandal. As Jason's professional and familial support crumbled, Rachel was the next to abandon him. The glamorous fiancée who had clung to his side during the reunion now wanted nothing to do with him. Their engagement ring, a massive diamond Jason had flaunted to anyone who would look, was returned without ceremony. "I can't do this," Rachel said coldly when Jason tried to plead with her. "Do you know how embarrassing this is for me? My name's been dragged through the mud because of you. You're finished, Jason. Don't call me again." And just like that, she was gone, her heels clicking on the marble floor as she walked away without looking back. The final humiliation came when Jason realized how thoroughly he had been abandoned. His former friends, the same classmates who had laughed at Alex during the reunion, were quick to distance themselves once the scandal broke. Invitations to exclusive parties and events disappeared overnight. The people who had once fawned over Jason now treated him like a pariah. Jason's wealth, power, and influence, everything he had used to intimidate and humiliate others, were gone. The sprawling mansion he had boasted about was seized by federal authorities as part of the investigation. His luxury cars, including the Rolls-Royce he had flaunted at the reunion, were auctioned off to pay back taxes and fines. He was left with nothing but a tarnished name and the realization that his empire had been built on lies. And the worst part? He knew exactly who had set the wheels in motion. Alex, meanwhile, remained quietly in the background, watching as the consequences of Jason's actions played out. He hadn't done it for revenge or personal satisfaction. Jason's downfall was a result of his own choices that had finally caught up with him. As Alex walked into his office one morning, a colleague approached him with a newspaper in hand. The headline read, "Matthews' Empire Collapses. Fraud and Corruption Exposed." "You did good work on this one," the colleague said, nodding with approval. Alex simply smiled, folding the newspaper and placing it on his desk. "Just doing my job," he said calmly. And with that, he returned to his work, leaving Jason to face the ruins of his empire alone. Weeks turned into months and life moved forward. For Alex, the reunion and everything that followed became a chapter he rarely revisited. His work at the Department of Urban Development and Compliance remained demanding but fulfilling. Each day, he tackled projects with the same quiet diligence that had carried him through life. Infrastructure projects moved forward under his careful oversight, with an emphasis on fairness and ethics. While the echoes of Jason's downfall occasionally made their way into conversations or headlines, Alex didn't dwell on it. He had no reason to. But the consequences of that night rippled through the lives of others. Jason Matthews, once the cocky heir to a powerful family business, was now a ghost of his former self. The collapse of Matthews' enterprises had been swift and devastating. His family's wealth, so casually flaunted, was gone. Federal agents continued to untangle the web of fraud and corruption Jason had overseen, leaving him embroiled in a legal battle that consumed what little resources he had left. His once prized possessions, luxury cars, designer suits, and even the extravagant watches he'd used as symbols of success, were sold off to cover mounting debt. Publicly, Jason had become a cautionary tale, a man whose arrogance had blinded him to the consequences of his actions. He had gone from the most envied alumnus at the reunion to a punchline in news articles about white-collar crime. When the cameras captured him leaving the courthouse during his trial, his suit was ill-fitted, and his face bore the unmistakable strain of someone who had lost everything. But the humiliation didn't stop there. Jason's social circle, those same classmates who had laughed alongside him at Alex, vanished the moment his power and influence crumbled. Invitations to exclusive galas and events dried up. Former friends ghosted his calls. The men who had toasted to his success avoided him in public, unwilling to be associated with someone who had fallen so spectacularly. The worst blow came from his father, Richard Matthews, who had not only disowned him but publicly distanced himself in every way possible. Jason was no longer a Matthews, at least in Richard's eyes. Cut off from the family's remaining assets, Jason was forced to rent a small, run-down apartment on the outskirts of the city, a far cry from the sprawling mansion he once called home. His days were spent in courtrooms and lawyers' offices, trying desperately to fend off charges that carried the possibility of prison time. But as the evidence against him piled up, even Jason began to see the inevitability of his fate. Rachel's downfall, though quieter, was equally devastating in its own way. When Jason's empire collapsed, Rachel had been quick to sever ties, returning the diamond engagement ring with as much indifference as she had once shown affection. At first, she had tried to maintain her social status, leaning on other connections to keep herself afloat. But the association with Jason had tarnished her name, and whispers about her opportunism spread like wildfire. Her glamorous life unraveled as quickly as Jason's did. Friends who once envied her lifestyle no longer returned her calls. Brand endorsements and partnerships she had cultivated through social media quietly disappeared, leaving her scrambling for relevance. Without Jason's money to sustain her, Rachel was forced to move out of the luxury apartment they had shared and return to a more modest lifestyle. The humiliation of falling from grace was compounded by her realization that she had backed the wrong horse. Jason had seemed untouchable, a man whose wealth and connections would shield him from any storm. But now Rachel saw the truth. She had hitched her future to a sinking ship, and there was no one left to pull her from the wreckage. As for Alex, he didn't dwell on their fate. He had no interest in gloating or celebrating their downfall. His focus remained on the work that mattered, projects that improved lives, systems that ran more efficiently, and policies that fostered fairness. Each success at the department reminded him why he had chosen this path, even if it had been less glamorous than the lives others had pursued. One afternoon, Alex found himself in a meeting with colleagues, reviewing the approval process for a new urban housing project. The discussion was technical and detail-heavy, but it was exactly the kind of work Alex thrived on. As they wrapped up the meeting, one of his colleagues, a sharp-eyed analyst named Sarah, paused and glanced at him. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I read about that Matthews case in the papers. Sounds like it was a mess." Alex gave a small nod. "It was." "Well," Sarah continued, "someone must have done a hell of a job exposing it. Guys like that don't usually get caught unless someone's paying attention." Alex didn't respond, choosing instead to pack up his note. He wasn't interested in credit or accolade. The satisfaction came from knowing the system had worked, that the rules had been upheld, and that someone who thought they were above the law had been held accountable. Later that evening, as Alex walked home through the city, the memories of the reunion resurfaced briefly. He thought of Jason, standing smugly with his bodyguards, and Rachel, laughing at his expense. He thought of the classmates who had judged him based on the car he drove and the clothes he wore. At the time, their mockery had stung. But now, with distance and perspective, Alex saw it for what it was: hollow. Their validation had never mattered, and it never would. True worth wasn't measured by appearances or possessions. It wasn't found in the fleeting approval of shallow people. True worth came from integrity, from doing the right thing even when no one was watching. It came from standing firm in your values, no matter how many people tried to tear you down. For years, Alex had quietly built his career and his life on those principles. And while it hadn't always been easy, the reunion, and everything that followed, had affirmed something he had always believed: that in the end, substance would always outweigh flash. The thought brought a faint smile to his lips as he stepped into his apartment. It was small but comfortable, filled with the kind of warmth that came from hard work and personal growth. Alex set his bag down and glanced at the framed photo on his desk. His parents, smiling proudly at his graduation years ago. Their lessons about humility and perseverance had stayed with him, shaping the man he had become. Meanwhile, Jason and Rachel's faces had faded from the public eye, their downfall a stark reminder of what happens when arrogance and greed drive one's choices. They had sought power and status, but in the end they were left with nothing. Alex, however, continued to move forward. He didn't need their approval. He never had. The reunion had only confirmed what he had already known: true worth wasn't something others could give you. It was something you carried within yourself. And Alex would carry that with him for the rest of his life.